Dickson.
Good evening, Shavua Tov, Johannesburg. It's great to be with you all the way from Israel. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'd like to say Yishar Koach to the Chief Rabbi and to the community and to all of the Sinai Indaba team for this incredible, incredible event. Before I speak, I'd like to recognize some wonderful people who are here with us this evening, 10 students who are with me from Israel. They are here joining forces with Jewish and pro-Israel students, together with the South African Board of Deputies, the Zionist Federation, and soldiers. They're here to fight back against anti-Israel activities on campuses in Johannesburg and Cape Town. And they're an incredible group of people. They include, by the way, one of our StandWithUs staff. His name is Yahya Mahmoud. He's an Israeli Arab from the town of al-Fahim. He disavowed extremism in order to stand up for the state of Israel. Later this month, he'll be enlisting in the Israel Defense Forces. They're over here. Please thank them. Stand up. Stand up. Now, looking at the array of outstanding speakers, speaking on the topic of the optimism bias this evening, I'm a little intimidated. I'm not a life coach. I'm not an expert in Kabbalah. But there is one aspect that makes me uniquely equipped to tackle this topic of optimism, and that is that I'm Israeli. After all, think about it. Yes! Think about it. Think about every Israeli you know. Aren't they the most positive, life-affirming people you ever met? Maybe yes, maybe no. Israelis are brash, yes. Tough, for sure. Do they embody their national symbol, the sabra, with that prickly exterior and that gooey inside? Yes. But they also are a symbiosis of the tough and soft. They mesh together and they have an optimistic view on life. Don't believe me? Think of the two words you're most likely to hear from an Israeli. Yeh beseder. It's going to be okay. You could be in the worst possible circumstance, and they will still say, Yeh beseder. It's going to be okay. Now, a couple of years ago, I was faced with a challenge. We are blessed with 5 children, and my eldest daughter, who was just a toddler when we made Aliyah to Israel from the UK, was turning bat mitzvah. Now, I, as a proud father, needed to impart some words of wisdom for that occasion. Can there be any more proud moment for a father of young children than his daughter's bat mitzvah, to see a life that my wife and I brought into the world take a step forward as a Jewish adult? But I was vexed. What words of blessing and encouragement could I give her? And what optimistic message could I leave her with as she faces the imperfect world in which she's stepping forward into? There's a poem by Samuel Taylor Coleridge. It's called The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, in which a sailor returns from a long journey and he accosts someone at a wedding guest. Now, the mariner won't let that guest go. He holds him by his collar almost, hoping to tell his story, hoping that he would emerge wiser once he hears it. And I felt a bit like that. I found the words that I hope would inspire my daughter and give her an optimistic outlook for her life. We cannot ignore the challenges, I told her. In my lifetime, the world has become a darker place. When I celebrated my bar mitzvah, I fully expected that our best days were ahead of us. And as technology grew apace and things got easier, faster, and better, it seemed like the only way was up. But as rapid change brought people together, in some ways, it has torn others apart. And as a people, many Jews feel more fragile and more threatened than ever. But still, my optimism about our future and our destiny remain undimmed. I was lucky. My wife and I were raised to be proud to be Jewish and be proud of Israel. We were lucky to have access to a vibrant Jewish community, to a warm Jewish life and Jewish education. Israel was cherished in our lives. We celebrated when Israel succeeded and felt the pain when Israel was attacked. I told my daughter, when you were 2.5, we made a choice for us, but also a choice for you. We left our happy and comfortable life in the UK and made Aliyah to Israel, an Israel that, in addition to being thousands of years old, is about to turn 70 years young. An Israel built with the sweat of the pioneers and sustained and defended by brave soldiers. Soon after arriving, my daughter celebrated her birthday at nursery school, singing songs in Hebrew. On Yom Ha'atzmaut, Independence Day, she walked proudly in the street with a Star of David crown around her. Her daily life is guided by the ancient Jewish calendar. The streets we walk on are named for Jewish heroes and events. The language we speak is the language of our ancient ancestors. How lucky she is. How lucky we are. In a decade of life in Israel, however, my daughter has known wars, kidnappings, rocket attacks, stabbings, and violent acts of terror. As a parent, I wish I could shield her from all of this, but it permeates our life, psychologically and physically. Before anything else, after all, any dad just wants to protect their kids, but life is insecure. Centuries of persecution, I told her, have taught us that no one will defend ourselves but ourselves. Nothing, not even living independently, will give us complete security, and history has taught us that it never will. With this said, the best response to those who would terrorize us is to live out our lives freely, because it is our freedom that our enemies most fear. I will never forgive the terrorists that made us leap from our beds and run to the bomb shelter on Shabbat morning. But I know that us keeping Shabbat the way we want to and living our lives proudly in Israel is the ultimate rebuke to the terrorists. I told her that we often refer to the generation that lived through the Second World War as the greatest generation. True enough, particularly to those who fought an evil that would have readily seen our people destroyed. But, I said to her, yours could be the greatest generation too. It certainly has the greatest potential. Think of this. No generation before this one has had so much access to information, to education. No generation was part of a world that, despite being ever bigger, feels ever smaller. And in no generation have they had as much personal influence at their fingertips as this one. I mentioned that things can often look bleak, but in addition to her youthful enthusiasm and dynamic character, I told my daughter, there is so much in our story and in our presence in this often challenging world that should inspire you to go forward. First of all, she should think how lucky she is to be born in this generation. Has there ever been a more amazing time to be a Jew? Israel, of course, plays a critical role here. It is the heartbeat of Jewish life the world over. Many Jews lived for thousands of years being denied access to their homeland, but never detached themselves from it. How could they? Our liturgy, our prayer, our hopes, our rituals are infused with mentions of our land. And even when forced into exile, Jews knew that Israel was built in to our DNA. And to those, like many of our families who live outside the land, Israel is still the touchstone of our existence and the reason that Jewish life is so vibrant around the world today. And I said to my daughter, has there ever been a more amazing time to be a Jewish woman? At her bat mitzvah, she paid tribute to many of the biblical female role models. But in this generation, there are so many positive female role models for her as well. She lives in a country where there is no glass ceiling. Israel has had a female prime minister, foreign minister, justice minister, governor of the Bank of Israel, speaker of the Knesset. Females serve alongside their male counterparts in the Israel Defense Forces. Whatever she chooses to do in life, nothing will hold her back. To be Jewish is to be criticized, I told her. To be Jewish is to be maligned. To be Jewish is to be envied. To be Jewish is to be persecuted. But know this, none of these things have ever had anything to do with us. It has had everything to do with the people who are doing the criticizing and the maligning and the envying and the persecuting. And we have never allowed, and we never will allow, ourselves to be defined by our enemies. Our destiny is ours alone to shape. And the same goes with Israel. There's no shortage of criticism, much of it defamatory, about the Jewish state. There is no country in the family of nations singled out unfairly like Israel is. But just as Jews must never be defined by their enemies, neither must Israel. We are not what they say we are. We must guide ourselves by our own laws and our own moral code. This is what has sustained us for thousands of years. Our faith is that it will continue to sustain us for thousands more. You'll hear demonization of our country, I told her, but know also that we have friends and allies the world over, and someone is watching over us. And I concluded by reminding my daughter that she was about to become the first member of our family in generations to celebrate her coming of age in Israel. Her bat mitzvah took place in Jerusalem, King David's capital, and once again, the capital of an independent Jewish country. She has never known anything else, and neither have I. But I can only imagine what her ancestors, exiled to Eastern Europe, would have thought of this tantalizing reality, her becoming the first in our family to come of age in our own country. From UNESCO to the Palestinian Authority, some may wish to deny our history. They may be deluding themselves, but they will never fool us. In the week of my daughter's bat mitzvah alone, archaeologists found King Hezekiah's royal seal near the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. It's 2,700 years old, one of the many finds demonstrating the ancient and continual Jewish links to the land. How privileged we are that my daughter was able to say the blessing of renewal, Shehechianu, as she became bat mitzvah in our historic capital, another link in our unending chain. There may be times when the odds will seem too great, but remember, through millennia, we've seen it all before and feel confident that when up against the toughest of adversity, this too shall pass. And I ended my message to my daughter with 5 quick pieces of advice that I believe speak to the theme this evening. Be a unifier. So many focus on wedge issues, aspects of Judaism they don't like, or policies of Israel they think are misguided. That's their right. We must always question, reflect, and debate. It's part of our Jewish DNA. Gravitate towards ideas and people that unite us, and you'll be making the right choice. Secondly, be open to the world. I told my daughter I love that she is open to people regardless of where they come from. I love that she's learning Arabic, and I believe that Israel is a model for diverse populations that can coexist whilst being true to our own identity and respecting the identity of our country. Quiet coexistence happens in Israel every single day. Now, don't expect the media to report it, but it's happening. In the hospital where my daughter was born, in the baby room, the Tinokia, babies slept peacefully. Moshe next to Muhammad, Miriam next to Maryam, all born equal. We can be proud of that in the Jewish state. Thirdly, I told her, be stubborn. Not everything is a time to be stubborn about, but you know that in the Torah, Hashem calls us a stiff-necked people. Being stubborn is not always a bad thing. Being stubborn is about maintaining our identity, our traditions, and our rights, and one of the reasons why our people are still here. Fourthly, I told her, be a teacher. The Jewish people are all about education. Our greatest leader was not given a title for his leadership abilities, but is referred to as Moses, our teacher. Teachers are prized above all in Judaism. Our ability to learn is infinite, so should our ability be to teach. And finally, always remember, we retain a collective memory of our own history. We remember the events that formed us as a people. We don't forget those who fell so that we may live. I told her, we don't forget those who persecuted us so that may not happen again, and that she is part of the Shosheret Hadorot, the link of generations from her foremothers Sarah to Rebecca and onwards, and the bond with generations past that will allow her to be a bond for future ones. That was my message to my daughter, and I hope it has resonance to you too. Now, I mentioned at the beginning that I think that Israelis are uniquely optimistic and resilient. I'm actually writing a book on this topic called Is Resilience, Israeli Resilience. And together with a psychologist, I'm going up and down the country and interviewing fascinating Israelis so we can learn positive lessons from them. Some of our interviewees included Sherry Mandel, who lost her son Kobi Mandel tragically to a brutal terror attack. We interviewed Natan Sharansky, who spent 9 years in the Soviet Gulag just because he was a Jew. We interviewed the inventor of the Israeli rewalk system that helps paraplegics to walk once again. And we interviewed Avigdor Kahalani, a tank commander who was fired on in the Six-Day War. Receiving 60% burns all over his body, he famously returned to fight for his country, winning the Battle of the Valley of Tears in 1973. All these people have incredibly optimistic outlooks on life. And one of the final people we interviewed, and I'll end with this, is my friend Noam Gershoni. Noam was a lieutenant in the Israeli Air Force and was piloting his helicopter in the 2006 Second Lebanon War, and he began crashing. Now, you don't fall 6,000 feet from an Apache helicopter and live to tell the tale. However, not only did Noam live, but despite having extensive injuries, he broke both arms, both legs, his pelvis, his vertebrae, his jaw, his left elbow, his left shoulder. Noam went on to train in wheelchair tennis, and just 6 years later, after that horrific accident, Noam Gershoni went on to be Israel's first Paralympic gold medalist at the London 2012 Olympic Games. I asked Noam what defines his resilience and positive mental attitude, and he told me that while events are beyond our control, people can control and influence their perspective and their outlook. He said to me, "My advice is, on a daily basis, find the things that will remind you how good your life is. Turn everything that happens to you into a positive. Even when dealt a bad hand, twist the circumstances to convince yourself to focus on the positives. And given our history, our present, and looking to the future, we have every reason to be optimistic." And that's the message that I gave my daughter. Thank you very much.